Hello, and welcome to Friends of Corista, episode 4. So, you know me and Richard, and today we want you to meet our guest, Dr. Keith Kaplan, who is Corista's Chief Medical Officer since 2013, and he's been an acting pathologist since 2001. So, when we started working on our discussion notes for our recording with Dr. Kaplan, Richard and I discovered really quickly that there was way too much information that he could share than what you would want to watch in one sitting. So, with that in mind, today's episode is going to be the beginning of a multi session discussion with Dr. Kaplan. And today we're going to be discussing the history of digital pathology, which we thought, as an investor of Corista, you might find to be really interesting. So, when you work with someone, you forget about what a big deal they might be. And in this case, what a big deal he is in the digital pathology space. Um, he has been at the beginning of the forefront from the concept and then development of the technology to its burgeoning adoption, right? That's happening right now. We're thrilled to have someone with his credentials and intense knowledge of the industry, and we'll be tapping that knowledge in the series with him. So it's history, the players in the industry, the current workload issues, and how to utilize technology to help address it, as well as the probable future of the industry. Um, Today's guest, Keith, is not only our chief medical officer, but he's our friend. We know him as Keith, the bearded teller of big fish stories and prairie dog hunting escapades, but he's also an internationally sought after, well informed, and engaging speaker on pretty much any topic in digital pathology. His credentials are equally as impressive. He is or has been known in his career as medical director, chief information officer, chief pathology, author, multiple times award winner, U.S. captain, major, and professor, with well-known organizations like Walter Reed, the U.S. Cancer Military Cancer Institute, Northwestern University Feinberg School of Medicine, Mayo Clinic, Carolina's Pathology Group, the VA, and multiple hospital systems across the country. Currently leading a large pathology, you would think I could say that word, serving 20 hospitals across 4 states. Um, so, Keith, if I haven't made you blush yet, let me just try a little bit harder. I think I speak for the whole Corista team in saying that Corista is better today, having had your expertise and contribution over these last 12 years. And we are so very happy to have you with us today to share your perspective and your knowledge. So, Richard, I know you have a few questions for Keith, so I'm going to turn it over to you guys. Take it away.
Thank you, Lee, and welcome, Keith. Like Lee said, when I started to think about Keith, I go back to, before, in my view, before really Corista. And um, I felt like the investors would really like to know, where does digital pathology come from? What's the history of medical imaging? And why is digital pathology so important? And so this episode will be very focused on the early trials and tribulations of going digital, and it'll take it up right to where Keith became our first digital pathology customer. Um, a lot of information in this one segment. We'll try to keep it tight and relevant, but I'll start off with saying that, prior to my joining Corista, founding Corista with others, I had spent my time in digital radiology. And much like you'll hear from Keith, a lot of this has to do with the military. And I can remember doing a white paper, which became a IEEE journal paper in '91 when I was at Sprint. And what I did was I had fiber in the ground and telecommunications. And at that point in time, we were working with the University of Kansas radiology group because um, They were trying to solve a problem. The problem was there were three military hospitals or army hospitals in 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 the Missouri, Kansas area that didn't have pathology because everybody was overseas supporting our troops, and they didn't have radiology. And we figured that we could at least maybe solve the radiology problem. So we hooked up radiology from the University of Kansas to those army hospitals, and we were able to provide all the wives and children and family members of those military um, soldiers as they served their country. And that was really the birth of digital radiology that we have today. And it's a funny thing because if I talk to any one of my investors that have no experience in where this all came from, they just assume that radiology is all digital. But I can assure you that when we started, it was not. We used to have these 14-inch long pieces of film, and we had a digitizer in the corner of these hospitals. And my job was to sell the service and to calibrate the image to make sure the quality was good. And so we would take the 14-inch piece of film and we'd stick it in. And oh gosh, if you don't get both ends in there correctly, you got a problem. And then it would come through it and make an image. And we would send that image from Lawton, Oklahoma, or the Army Hospital, or a small hospital in New York, in the southern tier of New York State, or anywhere, to somebody over the Sprint network that I had built, so that could be read by a radiologist. And I had radiologists coming over from the Brigham at night on their way home, and I paid them $100 an hour, and they would come to our Waltham facility and they would read this. And we did a transcription service out of Atlanta that would send the reports back to the customer. That all evolved from very somewhat manual. I used to have to deal with 20 kilobyte size files once digitized images. As you know, these pathology images, they're just huge. 10 gigabytes might be something you get to think about. You can press that down with JPEG 2000 maybe to half a gig, but good luck moving that around. So that was radiology. And then as I got to know Keith more, I realized he was almost like I was coming out of a phase and he was going into a phase. uh, and that's how long we've been working on digital pathology. And so that's sort of the background of one reason why I founded the company. I ran into a pathologist who said, he's a German guy, Wolfgang Kleitman, and he said pathology must go digital. And I don't think anybody argues. So with that, Keith, I'd love to hear your aspect of the evolution that you went through as really one of the pioneers in this industry that's much more mature today.
Sure, sure. And thank you for the very kind and unnecessary introduction, but had a great experience combining technology and medicine, and been fortunate to have a number of opportunities. I attended a Northwestern University School of Medicine on a military scholarship and was fortunate to get a residency at Walter Reed Army Medical Center in Washington, D.C., which shared a campus with the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology at the time, which was one of the premier pathology institutions in the world. And Walter Reed was a worldwide referral center. We had patients from all over the world coming to Walter Reed, and all the dignitaries and so forth in Washington. But so I had an awesome experience there, fantastic mentors, unbelievable cases, diseases I haven't seen since then, 30 years ago now. But as I progressed, I became a senior resident. It looked like I was going to stay at Walter Reed, and everybody, to your point, Richard, had a remote hospital that they covered. People at Walter Reed would backfill or would supplement Fort Knox, Kentucky, Fort Bragg, North Carolina, Fort Belvoir, Virginia. Since I was the junior guy, I got West Point, New York, which was one of the most difficult places to get to linearly. and really terrible in the winter. And I would have to go up there and cover frozen sections remotely. And the problem is when you leave one place and go to another, nobody's doing your work for you at the other place at the home base. So I started thinking about using technology to try to do remote frozen sections. It was an application that was actually in use in Scandinavia for decades. Similar situation, harsh climate, remote areas, underserved areas. And the whole mantra in the Army Medical Department was to advance the subspecialty care or specialty care as far forward as possible. I happened to stumble upon at a chemistry meeting of all things a robotic microscope that could allow you to control a microscope over the web. We're all using T1, very basic internet connections at that time. And I saw them at a show and I controlled the mouse and I moved a microscope stage 300 miles away in near real time. And I said, the Army needs about 25 of these. And eventually we did that over a couple of years. And that all became integrated with the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology for subspecialty consultation. One of my very first abstracts at a scientific meeting was expert opinions a mouse click away. And that's literally what it was. So the other issue that I thought about in the military, I was fortunate to stay at a large medical center with plenty of mentors, but the Army and the military healthcare system in general graduates new residents and puts them in one man or one woman hospitals routinely, not only at places like Fort Knox, Kentucky, when that was a larger hospital, but overseas as well. And so they don't have necessarily the support that I had. And so how can we extend that support to others? And so we started with robotic microscopes. And by the mid 2000s, that had started to migrate to whole slide imaging. And all of these hospitals were connected to one another and connected to the AFIP to allow for those consultations. At the time, to your point, Richard, telemedicine was kind of a burgeoning field. Even though telepathology had been around, as I said, in Scandinavia, the first instances of telepathology were between Massachusetts General Hospital and Logan Airport, about 10 miles away, over black and white command stations. And Dr. Ron Weinstein did that when he was at Harvard and went on to do other prototypes, demonstrations in the military, including at William Beaumont in El Paso. And then he became chairman at Rush, where he developed Rush here in Chicago, where he developed Karabi Telemetrics, which eventually became Apollo Telemedicine. Ken Bloom was part of his team at Rush. He went out to California to US Labs. That became something called Clarion, or he moved to Clarion, I should say, but they developed ChromaVision. ChromaVision was one of the very first FDA-approved image analysis or computer-assisted diagnosis algorithms. So we've had this for some time in terms of using the technology increasingly over that time, whole slide imaging for diagnosis, access, support, and some form of computer-assisted diagnosis.
So that's great. So could you just give us a definition of doing a wet read or a frozen section, or because I think that's really important for our investors to understand how close we are getting to where things are happening. I know today you actually did earlier you did a frozen section, and I'm just sure none of my investors understand what that means when I say it. So.
Yeah, an intraoperative consultation or frozen section is probably one of the most critical turnaround times in medicine. Our governing body that regulates laboratories, accredits laboratories, the College of American Pathologists, requires 90% of frozen sections to be completed within 20 minutes. So it's a very critical test that typically surgeons order that will dictate whether or not they're going to do additional surgery or stop, or if they're going to change their approach to management. So unlike formalin fixed, paraffin embedded tissue, you get the next day, look at under your microscope, you have the ability to show around, perhaps get a consult, perhaps I can send it downtown to Northwestern to my colleagues there, etc. Your feet are kind of to the fire in the frozen section room, because that's going to dictate whether or not additional surgery is done, or perhaps, unfortunately, they don't do any additional surgery based on the result of the frozen section. So for hospitals that don't have that service, they're missing a critical piece in terms of surgeons being able to appropriately stage and treat patients. And that was the first application at West Point, was they didn't have a pathologist there, and they limited their ability to do surgeries. So if you can imagine, 1999, 2000, United States Military Academy, the hospital in West Point, New York, did not have a full-time pathologist and relied on folks like me as their visiting pathologist, medical director and visiting pathologist, to be available for essentially a scheduled or anticipated frozen section. And the problem with frozen sections is, for example, you might go in for an appendectomy and the surgeon sees something that he needs to know, or she needs to know what it is, and do a frozen section, because now the patient's on the table and they want to try to manage the situation as best they can. So, the practice has changed a little bit, as you and I have discussed, Richard, but it's still a very acute test that requires immediate interpretation. When I was a resident, they would do mastectomies, they would do amputations, they would do lobectomies for lungs based on the result of a frozen section. We have more pre-surgical testing now that negates some of that, but at its peak, and still, if something is incidentally discovered, can really change the course of a surgical procedure.
That's very helpful, and it also ties to our another initiative we have with Dr. Gary Vitale, who's a pancreatic cancer surgeon, and he certainly has a pathologist that comes to the surgery suite. Doesn't have a lot of control over that in his view. Sometimes they're more junior and they have to relay to the main pathology group on campus. But at the end of the day, he really wants to get it right faster, even faster than maybe the early days of frozen section, which was so fast compared to everything else.
Mm-hmm.
In his world, and I wish he were here on the line with us. He's in there. He's in surgery now. He's taking tissue samples. He wants that information to go out to experts immediately. Maybe to the point where he actually has a list of all of his favorite, surgeons that are like he is, and they just want to. Maybe they know something. We're not talking about an official second opinion. We're just talking about, hey, John, have you seen anything like this? Explain the time when they found melanoma in the pancreatic organ, So there's a whole future for what started in the beginning. It was the same.
This is one of the dynamics we'll talk about in terms of market forces, but about the time, when I came out of training in the early 2000s, there about 2000, you could hang up your shingle as a general practitioner, essentially, in pathology, anatomic and clinical pathologist as a generalist, and do head to toe. And you were expected to manage about 90%, maybe 95% of what came under your microscope. You might have to refer out 3 to 5 to 7% or so of cases that were beyond you, particularly rare, unusual things. And so that was kind of the goal. Particularly, we're training people going out by themselves, as I mentioned. But now there is a tremendous need and desire And essentially, not to use it in the legal sense, but a standard of care that everybody wants their own pathologist. So he wants his own GI, liver, pancreaticobiliary pathologist. He wants his staff to be all GI, liver, pancreaticobiliary trained. The breast surgeons want their own breast pathologist. The neurosurgeons want their own neuropathologist. So that's caused some stress and strain on an already limited workforce in pathology. We probably have enough generalists, but we probably lack subspecialists, particularly in remote or underserved areas. So this is, I know we'll get into that in terms of market forces and the dynamic, but this is the entire point about being able to extend that specialty care as far forward as possible. And it's a two-way street, right? This was one of the, I think, the initial premises for the Da Vinci robot, so that somebody could actually operate remotely, or at least look in and guide the surgeon in the room remotely. So, we're all going to get there. Some of us are already there, but we're all going to get there. And, I'm fortunate that I get livers from all over the city, and I can send them in an urban area. I can send complicated cases to world-renowned experts. But not everybody has that advantage, obviously. And so to use the technology to do that, and I think it's still to this day, after doing this over 25 years, it's still extremely rewarding to help someone outside your immediate catchment area. We all want to serve our community, and we all do that. But to do that outside your city, outside your state, outside your country, it's a good feeling.
Absolutely. Well, I think that helps us with the start of this journey with Keith. Our next episode is going to be on when Keith became our first customer at Corista, which talks a lot about some of the same things that what's beautiful about this is, like in music, there's no generation that has better or worse music. All good music is good music. And in this world, there's a lot of good pathology that was going on before and now. And I think where Corista plays a big role is being the connector, to enhance what started, like when Keith, I mean, we're talking 30 years ago, we're talking um, a significant time. And now technologies have emerged that can help Corista and help us do things for our customers. And we're very happy to have Keith, and we look forward to everybody watching the next episode where we'll talk to Keith about what it's like to be Krista's first customer in a great city of mine anyway, Charlotte, North Carolina. See you then.
And hey, I
Thank
want to
you.
make note that since we're going to have multiple conversations with Dr. Kaplan, if you have any questions or topics that you would like us to discuss with him, shoot me a quick email and let me know what those questions are, what those topics are. Most of you have this, but just in case you don't, my email address is Lee, and that's spelled Leigh .Hon, HONN, at Corista.com. So again, Lee.Hon at Corista.com. And now we will say goodbye. So have a great week, everybody. See you next time.
See ya. Thank
Thank
you.
you.